in healthcare in general, but particularly in specialties like oncology. There's this huge supply and demand issue. The supply of doctors, nurses, physicians, and specialized knowledge and resources is not keeping pace with patient volumes. More people are being diagnosed, people are being diagnosed younger, people are living longer. Doctors and nurses are retiring and aging out, right? There are never going to be enough people to manage the need. The nurses and the doctors want to call everybody back by the end of the day, but there's too much coming in. Now as clinicians, you have omni-channel communications, right? So we have to lean into technology to help give these doctors and nurses a superpower of efficiency and speed that they just don't have because they're so overwhelmed. I want to try and solve that because the ultimate beneficiaries are the patients and the survivors and the caregivers on the other end of the phone or email or text or whatever.
Hello, welcome to 100MS Live, a podcast where we talk about everything AI and healthcare. We speak with leaders in patient access, revenue cycle, leaders on the clinical side to understand systems and processes that they've built and how they see AI influencing these systems, the people, the outcomes around all of these processes. Quick introduction about me and 100MS. I'm Aniket, one of the co-founders of 100ms.ai. We build voice AI agents for healthcare operations. I've been on the technology side most of my life, building out large scale live audio video systems at Disney at 100ms, where we've built telehealth infrastructure, remote patient monitoring infrastructure, telephony infrastructure for large US health systems, health tech companies. And while building these systems over the last 5 years, healthcare just has become this fascinating obsession for me. It's the space where we've built this startup in. It's super complex in terms of operations, in terms of the stakes that are involved. And I've had several interesting conversations around how AI is getting into this, how technology is getting into this. And the idea of this podcast is just surfacing some of these conversations. Super excited to have our guest for today, Trellis Usher. Trellis is the CEO and founder of Nova Health Labs. It's a digital health startup helping oncology providers improve operations with technology in general and AI specifically. But what makes this podcast or Trellis super interesting is I've had conversations with people on the provider side. She's the first one we brought on who's been on the patient side. So she's a breast cancer survivor and a patient advocate. Nova, in fact, was born out of her own experiences with care during her treatment. She also brings this very unique perspective to all of the current questions around AI and jobs in healthcare. What's going to happen to nurses, medical assistants, even physicians? Is AI going to take all of our jobs? There's like some amount of fear around these conversations. And Trellis is the perfect person to be talking about this. She's been in talent, leadership development, coaching, and workforce transformation for 3 decades now, which means she's seen technology waves come in and heard a lot of these similar conversations in 99, in 2007. She's had leadership roles on the talent side in Salesforce, at Pax8, where she was the SVP. And her perspective on this, now that she's operating and working with practices to improve their operations, and her experience in the past and how technologies have affected this, is going to be another part of this conversation that's going to be super, super interesting. Trellis, super excited to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Aniket. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, and I started work when I was 10, so that's why I've been doing something for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm teasing. It gets to be that every time I have conversations with people about my work history, I remember when it used to be, oh, I've been doing this for 10 years, or oh, I've been doing this for 12 years. Now I've been doing this for 25 plus years. It's like, where has the time gone? So happy to be here and excited to talk to you.
I think even some of the workforce transformation things that you've done have been at fairly interesting times in
Yeah.
workforce history, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been having conversations forever about the nature of work and how work is changing, the skills that people need to perform the work, all to the tune of trying to just make organizations as operationally effective and efficient as we can. And so, with the advent and the evolution of AI, that's all part of the conversation now. And part of what's really interesting to me is helping to figure out what those shifts are. I remember when the internet was this big scary thing, and then
Yeah.
email was this big scary thing, and then Google was this big scary thing, right? It was all going to take over in some nefarious way. So I'm always excited to just look at what's happening with technology and what that means for the way that we think about and do work.
To start off from the specific context of this conversation, I'd love to understand your experience as a patient when you were going through your diagnosis and treatment.
I remember vividly the conversation that I was having with some really good friends of mine. And somehow or another, as women do when we get together and talk about everything under the sun, the subject of mammograms came up. And out of my four really good friends, I had to be the one to acknowledge that I had not yet had my first annual
Oh,
mammogram. And as good sister friends do, they said, we're going to haunt you until you get this appointment scheduled and you go get it done. And so I finally did go get it done. And on my very first mammogram, I heard those words that nobody really wants to hear, which is you have breast cancer. Not only do you have breast cancer, you have a very aggressive form of breast cancer, which is triple negative breast cancer. Predominantly affects women of color, can move really quickly. And so I had to wrap my head around this really quickly. Luckily now, my 10-year cancerversary, totally cancer free, everything's fine. But
so
during that time, as you can imagine, it was a really scary thing. And so while I was receiving excellent clinical care, a patient's experience is not limited to the care that they receive when they're in the doctor's office or in the hospital. It's the entire experience, all of the interactions and touch points that surround when you happen to be in an infusion chair or in a radiology clinic. And so, because I had worked in large enterprise companies and I had the operational experience that I had, I quickly realized there was just a lot of fragmentation and inefficiency. We could say that across all of healthcare, right? You know it every time you have to step into it, but particularly when you're dealing with an acute or a chronic illness where you sort of are living in your doctor's offices and in medical visits for 6 or more months, you realize how inefficient it is. And trying to get a doctor on the phone, trying to get a
mm,
nurse on the phone, trying to get emails returned in a timely manner. Because remember, as a patient, this is the first time I'm dealing with this. I know my care team does it all day, every day, but this is the first time I'm going through this. And so I'm anxious, I'm distressed, I've got a lot of questions that I want to have answered. So that lifeline to information and my care team is really important. And they were doing the best that they could because they're such a great provider. Just the patient caseloads were not working in their favor, right? The outdated tools that they were still using were not working in their favor. And I was like, you know what? We got to be able to do this better. And I knew that when I got better, I was going to want to give back to this community that had given so much to me. And so Nova started out really on the B2C side. We started on the patient side. My only aim initially with a digital marketing campaign was how do I help newly diagnosed breast cancer patients get access to the right information at the right time? That was all I wanted to do. So we started with a mobile app. It was going to be around helping to curate resources based on where you were in your care journey. What we quickly realized, though, is that you can create very empowered and educated and informed patients. But if they run into a throughput issue when they call their provider's office, you've only solved part of their problem. Now you have very empowered, equipped, and frustrated patients because they still can't get the information in time. Why? Because the clinical care team is busy focused on a lot of extra noise that's coming into the practice. So then we pivoted and we said, okay, how do we help take some of that noise out of the practice so that we get nurses, PAs, nurse practitioners, and physicians operating back at the top of their licensure, getting
love
them
this.
back doing the stuff that they were doing, which is the reason they got into the field. Let's get them back doing the things that only they can do. And how can we leverage technology to just get all that other stuff out of the way so that when a patient calls or emails or texts, they get to the person in time that they need to. So that was the genesis of Nova.
Most people, if they're diagnosed and even recover, will just have the energy to get back into their regular lives. You trying to
Yeah.
sort of take on this full mission to educate other fellow cancer patients. Like this is fantastic. This contrast struck me acutely when I first started doing healthcare.
Mhm.
All of the physicians and nurses I'd meet would be some of the best people I've ever spoken to. They'll remember every single detail about me, everything that happened to me. And then I would hear these really frustrating stories from patients where you're trying to reach to them, send them an in-basket message.
Yeah.
You are super anxious. I can only imagine how much anxiety there could be when you're getting diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer for the first time.
Yeah.
But these people are working 14-hour workdays, 16-hour workdays. One of the first conversations that we were having was with this large health system in San Diego. Their CMO is still practicing partially then. He said, our everyday is spent responding to in-basket messages or like just text
Yeah.
messages from patients who've reached out to them. Now, he wanted to respond to them. He wanted to tell their patients, hey, this is what you should be worried about. Like some of them are routine questions for him. And that speaks to what you said, right? They
Yeah.
aren't operating at the top of their licensure when they are responding to routine
That's right. That's right.
in-basket messages.
That's right.
But yeah, I think there's so much that can happen on that communications layer. I think just beyond what you have in person. And it's only ballooned in the last few years and decades, like these communication touch points.
Yeah, that's right. Because think about what they have to grapple with now as clinicians. You have omni-channel communications, right? It's not that they're just calling in on the phone, patients, right? They're emailing. You now have chat bots on most websites for most hospitals and health systems and clinics. You have messages coming at you that way. You have text messages for reminders, for appointments and prescription refills. And here's the other thing. It's not just patients calling into these practices,
Yeah.
right? There are people calling for lab results, and there are pharmacies. There are sales reps calling from innovative tech companies that want to sell them something, right? There's no wonder you can't figure out who's the most urgent call to get back to. We talked to one of our early beta customers, and we sat down with a nurse who was using a very early version of Nova. And immediately she told us this would save me 4 hours a day, right?
Oh,
I made the decision early on that while everybody else was going to try and solve this problem across all of healthcare, because it exists all across healthcare, we were going to go deep on oncology. Why? Because with every interaction, we get smarter, right? Nova was able to get smarter because we have disease specific intelligence. And there's a lot of information that patients leave in those voicemails and emails that we can extract, and it becomes unstructured data that we can then use to get more personalized responses and care back to them. And then we route those calls that need to go to the care team, but we give them a recommended triage algorithm or protocol that says, hey, these calls that are this urgency level, you want to call these folks back in an hour. These people can maybe wait until their next visit. But the care team is always acknowledging and checking off on that resolution, and at the same time continuing to help us refine and train the solutions. Yeah, there's just a lot coming at physicians. The nurses and the doctors want to call everybody back. They want to get back to them by the end of the day, but there's too much coming in. When I started doing some of the customer discovery and market analysis around this, there are a couple of other things working against them. And there's this huge supply and demand issue, right? In healthcare in general, but particularly in specialties like oncology. The supply of doctors, nurses, physicians, and specialized knowledge
yeah.
and resources is not keeping pace with patient volumes, right? More people are being diagnosed, people are being diagnosed younger, people are living longer, doctors and nurses are retiring and aging out, right? There are never going to be enough people to manage the need. So we have to figure out ways to lean into technology and allow the technology to help give these doctors and nurses a superpower of efficiency and speed that maybe they just don't have because they're so overwhelmed with what's happening in the system.
So the point that you spoke about specializing in oncology as opposed to like building a general triage nurse is super, super interesting. We had a similar-ish choice when we were building this voice agents technology. We could go down the route of saying that we're building it for like, everybody from real estate agents to healthcare to lawyers. We decided to specialize within healthcare, and now within healthcare, we partner with sort of groups or companies who bring in the sort of clinical specialty or knowledge for every single like, specialty, for
Vertical. Yeah.
example. That's the only way to do this because
Yeah.
I think for a long time, people on the buying side of software have thought of software as this horizontal thing. Let me take Five9 as a contact center software.
Yeah.
Let me take Salesforce as my CRM. It's the
Yeah.
same functions. I have to make a call, I have to see analytics, I have to see recordings. But
Yeah.
you don't think of that when you're hiring like a nurse, a
That's
registered
right.
nurse for my oncology practice. You're looking
That's
for
right.
a registered nurse who has had that experience.
Yeah.
AI agents isn't traditional software buying. It's buying the closest equivalent to hiring people that you can have right now. Now, it's not like I think purely a technology constraint. It's more a focus and time and training constraint. You can't really have one company training 200 agents, one for oncology nurse, one for oncology scheduling, one for gastroenterology
That's right.
pre-procedure training. They're all very specific tasks. If you
Yeah.
were to hire for these positions right now, you would hire for someone with experience.
That's exactly right. The difference in healthcare is that, and I'm sure it exists in other verticals and other industries, but specifically in healthcare, the way you manage and think about triaging a patient with diabetes is very different than you do with a patient with oncology. It's the reason why I don't necessarily go to my primary care doctor if I break my foot, or if I'm having cardiac problems, I go to a cardiologist. And so in healthcare, to your point, we've got to try and get as close as we can to the specialized skills and knowledge of the people doing that kind of work if we really want to make a dent. Otherwise, we just become very sophisticated IVR, and it's like,
Yep.
I'm going to schedule your appointments, I'm going to refill your prescriptions, but other than that, I've still just got to route you to the human. All that happens now is all of these interactions just get to them faster because now Nova or the AI agent was just handle the things that they could do. They'll automate some workflows, but then the bulk of them get forwarded on. If we really want to lean in a little bit further, I think being more specialized with these agents is going to be the way to go. Now, we need technology partners that are very skilled in creating these platforms, creating these AI agents, but who can quickly take them and then fold in the vertical expertise so that they can work specifically on the workflows that they're designed to help with. And it's a choice that we made. You could argue, is there more market opportunity if you sort of do it horizontally? Yeah, maybe. But as a breast cancer survivor, I'm going for impact,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, the vertical decision was the only one.
And I'd like to push back on the horizontal opportunity. I think that's a mirage right now. You're not going to replace your contact center system or the IVR system right now. I think you're going to replace it with Nova's intelligence. And I can speak about this with confidence. We've been
Yeah,
working together on creating Nova's AI agents. That's
yeah,
such a big lift. Let's say, for example, an oncology practice right now has an IVR where if you're calling, hey, if you have an urgent condition, call 911. If you have some symptoms to report, please leave a message here. If you have a prescription or if you're a pharmacy, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
right.
Here's what I'm seeing bias split into. There's two kinds of bias that I'm seeing. One of them comes in, and instead of them pressing 1, 2, 3, 4 or the IVR 2.0 equivalent where they have to say prescription refill or stuff like that, can you just make it a little more human-like?
Yeah,
But the outcome's the same. You're
the same.
still just moving things a little faster to the human. That's one sort of questions that I see. Oh, LLMs should be able to have the same conversation, but LLMs are not being leveraged to truly resolve some of the questions there. That's one spectrum. The other one that I'm seeing is very, very early adopters and super enthusiastic people who are saying, oh, I just fed in my diagnosis to ChatGPT
Mhm.
and it was able to give me a triage. Why don't we just plug in ChatGPT and just let this run? Obviously, these people are in the minority,
Yeah,
but I think we
yeah,
should address this question as well. I like to call this the 60-40 effect. Right now, AI technologies where if you ask them a medical question, maybe 65% of the times you'll get like the right answer.
mhm, mhm,
Try and put it into production for a very specific use case like any traditional LLM without any additional context about how this practice likes to triage its
right,
patients, how this practices physicians split time into different diagnoses,
yeah,
how oncology specifically deals with someone who's experiencing pins and needles, for example, for a
yeah,
couple of hours versus 3 days. that's not knowledge that these AI models have traditionally been
Right.
trained on. It's proprietary knowledge
Right.
that's sort of been kept in silos and that can only be brought about by people like you. So even that
Yeah.
extreme, let them handle all of these questions, or
Yeah.
even let's do some level of basic minor training and then let them run on healthcare use cases, also not the right approach. You
Yeah.
have to come to the middle where, let's say, if someone's reporting a symptom, then
Hmm.
have the AI agent come in and maybe ask more qualifying questions depending on what the symptom is.
Right.
Not diagnose, let's not try and do that now, but at
Yeah.
least save that one phone call that the nurse would have had to have the
Yeah.
AI agent ask those questions. Then someone can
Right.
just review, give the
That's
diagnosis, and then you can run like a bunch of
That's
these
exactly
things.
right. I think as we talk about the work that we're doing together, we mocked that up within 2.5 minutes or so. The person's question was resolved. Nova was able to schedule a follow up appointment because that's what was needed because this person was presenting a symptom that was new for them. And oh, by the way, what would a nurse do? A nurse would also educate you a little bit about the pins and needles. Like, what is that you're feeling? So that in between time leading up to your appointment, you're not sitting there stressed out, not quite sure what's happening with you. Oh, by the way, Nova can pull information that's either from your knowledge base in your practice or pull information that we mined from the LLM to then email the patient out something on peripheral neuropathy, for example, right? So now you get a little bit of education as well
Yeah,
with the AI that you would have gotten with the nurse. So again, you want to come as close as you can to that kind of experience. And you have to be vertical. You have to be in the disease specific realm that you're working in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's too much, it's too complex. You truly are trying to boil the ocean. And very rarely do we go to our primary care, once, twice a year, maybe, to get that generalized help and support and any diagnoses. But after that, it's the
yeah.
specialist, right? And that's where we believe the future of AI and agentic AI is going in healthcare.
I'll come back to just explaining to some of the listeners what the workflows are. But before I get there, you mentioned one thing about clinicians just operating at the top of their licensure as
Yeah,
opposed to doing mundane stuff. Just as someone who's done workforce transformation in the past,
yeah.
what's going to happen is I'll do the clickbaity question. Is everyone
Yeah.
going to get replaced by AI?
I certainly hope not. I love my oncology nurse. I tell people if I could have named the product Carol, I would have named it Carol because she
Oh,
made such an
wow.
impact on my life. I know there are those that are out there on the bleeding edge 20 years or 10 years in front of us saying that we will have fully autonomous, unsupervised AI doctors and nurses. I don't know. I think what we do is we give them back time to provide empathetic, expert, quality care. And so for me, Nova's ethos isn't about replacing nurses. And I actually wrote a blog post a few weeks ago, and it's AI is not coming for your job, it's coming for your workflows. Those tasks, those series of tasks that make up a job, right? We do job design in sort of talent and HR, and you have to analyze and look at the entire job and all of the tasks that are done within that job, all of the skills that are required to do that job, and figure out if there are opportunities to streamline or automate some of them. It doesn't mean the entire job goes away. You look at that job in the context of, okay, what could be done faster, more accurately, more efficient, more safe? And so, again, I don't think there's this scary thing that we need to be focused on. What we also find in workforce transformation are the people that are in the jobs right now are the best suited to help figure that out.
Yeah.
If you do this job of a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner or an operations manager in a clinic every day, and you've been doing this for the last 5, 10 years of your career, who in the world is better suited than you to start to really unbundle in a job to say, here's the stuff that I do every day that I really don't need to be doing, or it's taking me too long, or the outcome is not as efficient as I need it to be. For me, healthcare, again, it's one of those spaces where I think it's supposed to be and should always be patient and human centered. Because at the other end of that disease, at the other end of that phone call, at the other end of that text message, there is a person, right? Healthcare is uniquely human in that way. There's somebody there who is looking for empathy and care. And so for me, that means that humans are forever a part of the equation. At least in my lifetime, Aniket. We'll see.
Uh, let's put this into perspective because you understand this super well. If you could describe for our listeners, let's say the life of that nurse who was, for example, spending 4 hours a day drowned in these IVR voicemails, can you describe her day
Yeah.
in her life?
So we actually did some interviews, we did some observations, sitting there and watching the day. And essentially, you could imagine the person shows up for work at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. They put their stuff in their locker, get to their desk, have a cup of coffee maybe, and they sit down and they turn on the phones. And it starts,
Oh
right?
my God,
The
yeah.
phone calls, the emails. But not only does it started yesterday, right? One of the first use cases we were looking at trying to solve for our early customers was voicemail backlogs. So before you even get started today, you've got to figure out what to do with the stuff that came from yesterday. Where a patient at 7 o'clock on a Friday may have been anxious about something and tried to call or wanted to call, and they didn't get through because the office was closed, right? And so you come on Monday morning and get started, and there's stuff there from over the weekend. And so nurses felt like I was starting already behind the eight ball, if you will,
Yeah.
because I've got these voicemails and these calls I need to return from yesterday. And oh, the phone is ringing today. And the
Oh,
emails are coming in today. And yeah, by the time we sat down with her, and I think in those early ones, we weren't taking any of the live calls. It was just giving her a dashboard so that when she got to work on Monday, we had already transcribed and triaged and spit them out via our algorithm and said, here's our recommended sequence of who you call back first, second, and third. These are the ones that are most urgent, most hot. You got to get these people back today. And then these are the ones where you have a little bit more time. And then she could go in. We didn't have this feature at the time, but she would be able to then go in and say, okay, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. If we rated something as maybe a 3, for example, and it rose to the level of, with her clinical expertise of being a 4, then
yeah.
she could bump it up, right? But her day was just seeing patients, checking patients in, back and forth between calls, and only about the other 50% of her time really seeing patients, right? Doing vitals, checking in with the doctor, a lunch break gets thrown in there in some way or another, following up on prescription refills, lab results, all of those things. And so overwhelmingly, the folks that we've talked to, they already understand that there are parts of their job that are inefficient and that they would be happy for a tool or some technology to handle and take on for them. And patients
Okay.
calling in are nervous, they're anxious. And so a voicemail that essentially, by the time you strip it down, is really only about 30 or 40 seconds worth of useful information. The rest of it is just talking because I'm nervous, I'm scared, I don't know what's going on. But as a nurse sitting there listening back to those voicemails, you have to listen to all 4 minutes of it, right? And what if you have 30 or 40 of them just on a slow day? It's just hugely inefficient when it comes down to time. So if we can take that, give you the keywords, give you a sense of what the voicemail was about. You still always have the source file. You can go back and listen to it if you need to. We believe if you need to call that person back, it gets you to them faster. When you call them back, you're a bit more informed about what it is. And again, you can distinguish between the pharma rep and a patient who's experiencing
Yeah.
a symptom because they had chemotherapy 3 days ago. If they're just all in voicemail, the pharma rep may have been the last call that came in. So if you just start calling back people in the order that they came in, voicemail has this first in, last out
Last,
problem. Yeah.
and pharma reps are probably smarter to call early in the morning, top of the queue.
Before your
Not
day gets started. Yeah, they hijack the day. Love to
and
all my
and
pharma reps out there. We love you.
and even on the patients, like what this does to the anxious patient who called, who's probably like getting care
Yeah.
or hearing from the nurses a little later
Yeah.
than now, I'm guessing.
You go to the emergency room or you go to urgent care, right? Depending on what it is. In every clinic, every hospital has a KPI that they look at in terms of readmissions, right? If I am freaking out because this is the first time I'm dealing with a cancer diagnosis and treatment, I don't know what can wait. I don't know what's urgent or not urgent clinically, right? I'm just going based on how my body feels. And when you're dealing with cancer treatment, your body feels crazy all of the time, right? You can't trust it anymore because nothing feels like it used to. Your brain starts to feed you all scary stuff and you want to get to someone as quickly as you can. to just get some answers. And if that means an ER doctor or an emergency department in the middle of the night on Saturday, then that's where I'm going. And so it's those types of things. There are a couple things at work. The patient needs that knowledge and information at the point of need, right? And so again, Nova just enables that care team. We won't be able to get rid of all of it, right? There are going to be those cases where a person does end up in an emergency department and maybe they could have waited until Monday morning, but they just felt like they needed to go. Patients know what's best. They need to trust their bodies. But if we can just take a little bit more of that off the care team's plate, then it's better not only for them in terms of their efficiency, but it's also better for those patients because they get the right information closer to the point of need.
And one of the things that's not talked about often is because of this breakdown of communication and anxious patients landing up at the ER, a cost of a single ER visit is significantly higher for the
That's
entire system. And that causes more strain within the system, even especially when you're talking about, oh, costs, we need to bring down healthcare costs. This is like a
yeah,
huge lever that you can pull. Figure out some ways of making sure that they are not anxious enough to get to the
yeah.
emergency.
Absolutely. It's a huge cost and, like you said, a huge tax on the overall system. And so, again, how can we lean in just a little bit more? I don't think we go all the way to 100, but there's a lot between hang up and dial 911 and what the care team needs
Yeah.
to do. And if we could handle just a little bit more of that for them, again, because we made this choice to focus specifically in oncology, then we do the entire system a better service. And you made me think about something. I was listening to a panel a couple weeks ago, and one of the speakers, who I think is a radiologist, was talking about this question of how much is too much when it comes to AI, and how much do we really want to do, and how do we hold the AI accountable, and do patients really even want to talk to a digital assistant? And one of the things that was interesting to me that he said was, he just asked a question and he let it just hang and float in the air. And it was a really interesting question. Are we holding AI to a higher account than we are humans?
Yep.
Human doctors aren't perfect. Human nurses aren't perfect. And it's not a dig on them. Again, it's just the nature of being human. But when it comes to AI and technology, are we expecting a level of perfection that we don't even hold ourselves as human beings accountable to? And I think his point was, don't let perfection sometimes be the enemy of progress. We don't have to take these technologies all the way to what we think might be optimal or 100% use. But don't let the fact that we can't do that keep us from doing the little bit that maybe we can really leverage the technology to do.
So it's a nice way to frame this. What we tell our customers often is, look, when you're hiring our AI agent, think of this super eager to learn, sharp, empathetic person that you're getting, but who's still largely a high school graduate. They're taking a lot of information and they will get better. They will get better over the next 6 weeks, 12 weeks. It'll take time from you, it'll take time from us to make sure that it keeps on improving. Because on day one, maybe it answers 7 out of 10 questions correctly. It makes some mistakes on 3 out of 10. You give it enough feedback. We meet every week, give it enough feedback. Hey, this is the mistake that you made last week. Now fix this. Keep on doing this for 10, 12 weeks. And now you have someone trained exactly like how you'd spend
Yeah,
and invest in like a smart, hungry person to train them.
yeah.
And then you get them to perfection. It's not just about not choosing it immediately as if it's not perfect, but even not giving it the grace to learn and get to that perfection, like even over a short-term period.
So if you can train AI in 12 weeks to sort of get the lessons, take the feedback, internalize it, digest it, and then operate in that way, yeah, I love that framing because I think that's exactly it.
Awesome. All right. I think we've been chatting about the problems around this for a while. I'd love to play what essentially with Nova's intelligence, we've built out an AI agent for you guys. I'll play the recording for this for everyone to understand. But why don't you set the context for this? What's happening in this call? What are we trying to
In this
discuss?
call, we've got a patient who's calling in and presenting some symptoms of some tingling that they're experiencing for the first time, and just wanting to get some information, wanting to speak with someone about it in the office to figure out what's happening and what they should do. And this is what we can do with Nova.
Awesome. Let's just play this quickly.
Hello, you've reached the office of Dr. Brown. This is Nova, Dr. Brown's digital oncology nurse. If you're experiencing a medical emergency, please hang up and dial 911 immediately. If not, how can I help you?
Hi. Hello. This is Eric Hall. I've been feeling a tingling sensation in my hands and my feet, like pins and needles. It's getting really consistent and constant now, and I'm not sure if it's neuropathy or something else. I was hoping someone there might have some suggestions for me.
Hello, Mr. Hall. I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. To ensure I'm speaking with the correct patient, may I please confirm your phone number and date of birth?
Oh, sure. My number is 555 1234567, and my date of birth is March 15th, 1985.
Thank you, Eric. I've confirmed your details, and I see you're an existing patient of Dr. Brown. I'm here to assist you with the symptoms you described. You mentioned a tingling, pins and needles sensation in your hands and feet. Could you let me know how long this has been going on?
It's been about a week now, I think, maybe a little longer.
Thank you for that. Is this sensation intermittent, coming and going, or has it been constant the whole time?
It started off on and off, but now it's pretty much constant, like all day.
I see. I'm sorry you're dealing with this so consistently. Are you experiencing any pain along with the tingling?
Yeah, I guess you could call it pain. It's not just uncomfortable anymore. There's definitely some pain there now.
Thank you for letting me know. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is slight pain and 10 is extreme pain, how would you rate it?
Uh, I'd say it's like a 3 or 4. It's not super bad, but it's more than just annoying now. It's kind of sharp sometimes.
I understand, and I'm glad it's not causing you extreme pain. I'll note that in your file. It could be a number of things, possibly neuropathy, as you mentioned, peripheral neuropathy, or nerve-related symptoms like tingling, numbness, or burning can happen for a few different reasons, including certain cancer treatments, while it's more common with chemotherapy. Some patients may also experience these symptoms after radiation, especially depending on the area treated. Since this is new for you, we want to make sure you're evaluated soon. I'll go ahead and schedule a follow-up appointment and escalate this to your care team. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Please wait while I check availability for an in-office assessment.
Okay.
The nurse practitioner can see you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Does that work?
Yes.
Great. I've booked you for that day and time. I will send your appointment confirmation via email and text. Would you also like for me to send you an email with information on peripheral neuropathy?
Yes, that would be helpful.
I'll send that email now. In the meantime, if your symptoms worsen, like increasing pain, difficulty walking, or weakness in your hands or feet, please don't wait. Call us back right away. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Eric?
No, that's all.
Thank you, Eric. Have a good day.
Bye.
Awesome. I'm super proud of having sort of
Yeah.
co-built this with you folks. You have
Yeah.
some of the most detailed clinical knowledge that we've built an agent with, so this was super, super interesting. But describe to us like what this call ended up doing for the us here.
Yeah. So what's interesting for folks to know is what's happening in the back of this is Nova's disease specific engine, our core intelligence, what we call it. So every step of the way, those extra questions that the AI is asking is giving more information to prompt sort of the response that's going to come back, right? This understanding that the symptom is new, that it's a 3 out of 4 on the pain scale, that it started out as consistent, but now it's a bit more constant. All of that is going through Nova's triage algorithm, along with extracting keywords like numbing, tingling, neuropathy, extracting that from the voice call in real time. And so when the tool gets to the point of saying, this is something that's new for you, so we want to have you in the office to see you, that's our triage algorithm at work. We could have just said, hang up, call back, make an appointment, or we'll have the care team call you back in a couple of days to schedule an appointment. But because we know specifically with neuropathy, there needs to be some sort of diagnosis by the care team. Because this symptom is new for the patient, you want to see them typically within 24 hours. So we can go ahead and handle those pieces that we can fully automate. But also, again, a lot of that anxiety and distress sits between the initial call and by the time I show up for the
Yep.
appointment. So what Nova can do is, again, would you like for me to send you information on peripheral neuropathy, right? A little bit of education on the call in terms of what it is and when it may normally present, chemotherapy, but sometimes in radiation. But also can send an email immediately to the patient that provides them with some just-in-time information that they can then take and continue to educate themselves until they can get to their appointment with the doctor. Does a couple things, lowers the stress, also gives them an opportunity to figure out what questions they want to ask the doctor or the nurse when they get to their appointment. We've assessed the pain level. We have educated them a little bit about the symptom that they're calling in about. We've scheduled and confirmed an appointment. We've sent out information for them to help educate them on the disease. And all of it was done with a little bit of empathy. And the care team never has to touch it. What they see show up in their command center is how Nova resolved the call. And if there's anything that they want to change, they can always do that. But there are these calls, like I said, that sit between hang up and dial 911, and you absolutely have to just push it to a clinician. If we can handle those types of calls, then that's 3 minutes we just gave back that team. Now multiply that by maybe 300 calls that might come into your cancer clinic that day.
And it's typically not 3 minutes because typically the person who's leaving this voicemail is just saying, "Oh, I'm feeling pins and needles. Help me."
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
the nurse is probably going to call them back, ask all of these questions again. So that's another 3.5 minutes to build that contact.
that's right.
You most likely don't catch them. They're at work. They haven't
That's right.
picked up yet.
That's right.
The other thing is, look, the agent isn't diagnosing anything at that point of time. It's
Right.
doing some triage. It's setting up
Yeah.
appointments. In certain cases, it's not even setting up appointments, taking all of the information in, showing this on the Nova dashboard
Yeah.
for the nurses to review in the morning. All of this is doing exactly the stuff that you'd spoken about, taking off some of the mundane things, but
Yeah.
still letting the nurses deal with, oh, I still need to figure out what I need to do in this particular
That's right.
case. In this particular case, this seems urgent. Let me get the provider in. That decision that sort of still resides with the nurses.
Yeah.
But just reducing the anxiety, and this is my personal soapbox, I think voice is
Yeah.
probably the most empathetic form of comforting someone, like when they're
Yes.
anxious, right?
I would agree. And the thing about it, speaking of peripheral neuropathy, which is tingling in your hands and feet, if I've got to be texting or emailing or putting information into a portal, my tips of my fingers don't work well if I have neuropathy as a symptom or a side effect of chemotherapy or whatever. I think voice changes the game in a lot of ways from an empathy perspective, from a connection perspective, because you have inherently that empathy that you can build into a voice AI agent that you don't get with a chat bot or with a text bot or something like that. And I just think it just makes it feel much more empathetic to the human. And one of the other experiences that I had when I was going through my care journey is when you're dealing with cancer, you don't just have one doctor.
Oh,
You have
yeah.
a team of doctors, and sometimes they don't report into the same health system. I had 4 or 5 different portals at one point in time. And I was expected to interact with all those portals that did not talk to each other. I carried around a big folder with medical records and lab results in it because anytime I would go to this place or that place and they didn't have my records, the latest records, I was a person at the worst time in my healthcare life. I had to be the connective glue that sort of held all of that together. Integrations do a great thing because, again, if we're integrated with electronic medical records, and in this example we were, that's how they knew that this person was an existing patient of Dr. Brown's, we can also document the entire thing, right? We've got transcribed text that can now be documented in that interaction, and the nurse or the nurse practitioner or whomever is doing it doesn't have to do all of that for every call that comes in. Or we can batch upload your voicemails if you're still dealing with voicemail backlogs. The point is that those types of tasks aren't necessarily things that have to be done by the human. We want the human to be able to interact with the patient, like I said, in only the ways that they can. My mother was a nurse, and I remember the shift when it happened because she loved being at the bedside. She loved her patients. She liked interacting with the patients. When nursing switched and became much more about sitting down at a telephone, answering telephone calls, documenting things in the record, when she went from the bedside to sitting in a room, and it was the advent of a lot of telehealth, probably about 8, 10 years ago or so, before she passed away, that's when she fell out of love with nursing. And it was palpable. It's not why a lot of nurses and nurse practitioners and physicians get into medicine. They don't want to take phone calls. It's a necessary part of the care journey. It's proximity. I've got my phone in my hand when I'm presenting this symptom, and so I want to call somebody to figure out what's going on. So it's a part of it. But again, we've got to think about the job in total and figure out what parts of the job need to stay in the hands of the people and what parts of the job don't have to be.
The number of nurses I've seen over the last 4 years, even after COVID, I think this accelerated even further, just fell out of love with trying to do the paperwork, trying to do the
Yeah.
mundane stuff, trying to do the phone calls and not being around patients,
Yeah.
I think we can maybe help gift some of that time back to them to be able to do what they really, really
Yeah.
enjoy. I think that's
Yeah.
such a powerful line that you fall out of love for the job that you're trained to do if that sort of gets overwhelmed with so
You
much.
don't get a chance to do it. Yeah.
The other thing that you said, which is something we haven't worked on together, but we see this often, is healthcare right now is this jumble of siloed off data pools, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one health
Yeah.
system CMR doesn't talk to the other one, the payers portal doesn't talk to the EMR, and
That's right.
everybody says they're interoperable into like a bunch of those things.
I lived it. It's not yet there. We want it to be there, but it's not there to the degree that it needs to be yet. And patients who are not technologists don't want to be having to manage all of that. We know that the technology should exist to make that a lot better, but by and large, it's still very fragmented.
And
Yeah.
what you said, right? Like, at your worst point in your life, this
Yes.
every single patient going through a serious affliction is carrying out these folders, carrying out everything so that they know that the next physician that they're going to see doesn't have this information. So what we've also seen our agents get deployed for is breaking down these barriers because right now there's no HL7 Fire API calls where you can very cleanly have these systems interact. You know what you do have? You can pick up a phone call and call up the other specialist and ask,
That's correct.
hey, can you give me the gist of what exactly happened to this patient?
Yeah.
We now have agents on both sides. We have a bunch of agents on the primary care side because PCPs will refer a bunch of cases to specialists, and specialists can't plug into the
That's
PCP's
right.
EMR. They just have a very tiny referral fax.
Yeah.
They want to call up the PCP to figure out what was the diagnosis, what did you
Yeah.
know? And we have agents answering those questions for them to be able to look at that. And we also have agents who are calling up other physicians for referring cases to get more details.
Yeah.
Now, it's not as clean as an API call or a button where you can pull up all of
Yeah.
that report. You
And
can
guess
build.
what you just did there? You increase the volume of phone calls coming into a practice. Right.
That's
And then the other point that you also bring up is we've talked about inbound on this episode. What about all the outbound? Again, it's how do we start to think about those jobs in total and figure out which of those workflows. So whether it's inbound communications coming into the practice or it's calls that clinicians then have to make out of the practice, maybe not to patients, but to lab providers, to payers and insurers, to all of the calls that they then, as they're doing their day-to-day job, have to communicate with somebody outbound.
yeah.
How much of that is noise as well, and how much of that can we look at capturing and taking care of?
I can go another hour on some of the outbound stuff
Yeah,
that we're doing, but for another call, I
you'll
wanna
handle
wrap.
it in the editing booth. Just edit it way down. Yeah, but we can talk about this for a long time.
But you've been super kind with your time, and this was a very interesting
Yeah,
conversation.
likewise, likewise. Thank you.